Matthew and your brothers and sisters. The other day I was having a conversation with a young couple, and it was about their child, and they were saying, there's this one time when, this child was growing up, and they became a little nervous because, you wonder how, are you doing everything that you can for this child? Is there more that you could be doing? And especially this one particular instance, they were telling me about they were trying to teach something simple, like just trying to teach alphabets to the kids. Or we all teach our kids alphabets, right, when home. And so they're, trying to encourage, okay, so what does ball begin with? Ball. What letter is that? And of course the kid's like, And when that happens, you're like, oh, you're so frustrated. As a young parent, you're like, oh no, my kid doesn't know the alphabet. Okay, let's try another one. What does dog begin with? Dog. And of course the kid's like, and of course as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? You're getting very nervous, right? But then this person was telling me that as, just a matter of months later, the same child was now going back and asking the parent, I'm thinking of an animal, and it begins, what letter, hang on, let's see, I'm thinking of an animal, and it begins with the letter Z. Z. And of course, exactly, right? Someone said that. Someone says zebra, right? And of course the parent's like, wait, now my child, whom this parent was like so concerned that they weren't even picking up the alphabet, is now thinking about how the tables have turned. Now the kid is asking the parent, I'm thinking of an animal, it begins with this letter, what animal could it be? I'm thinking of this object, it starts with a B and it's round, what do you think it could be? You know what I mean? Like now the parent is the one who's receiving the question from the child. Think about the transformation that happens going from maybe not being able to make that connection. But there's a lot of things that happen in the mind, the brain, the development of these young children that goes on that's beyond our understanding. Or the way that the brain works, there's a lot of things that happen in the brain that are still a great mystery. And I think it's a very humbling thing to think about, because as much as we know about the human body, as much as we know about medical science and things like that, there's still a lot of things about like the brain and brain development and all the inner workings of the mind, that there are quite a few things that are still a mystery. And I think there's almost like a beauty to that. But anyways, this idea that just only in a matter of maybe a few months, this child goes from not really making those connections between the first sound of the word and the alphabet, to actually being able to turn the question around and ask the parent, there's something there. And this idea is that, it's this word that I'm thinking about, the word is trust. This idea of trust. And a lot of times we get into this panic mode. Because in our minds we have this plan. I have a plan for my life. I have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Maybe for some of the younger kids, they don't really have a plan. But I'm hoping that as these kids grow up a little bit, as they get into high school or college, they start thinking about what's their 5-year plan. What's a 10-year plan for their life? What are they going to do? Having some idea. We're encouraged as people, as adults, as family, to try to plan out what are we going to do for the next 5 or 10 years. Are we just existing day by day? Or do we actually have a plan? Are we moving in a direction? And it's good to have that plan. That's a normal part of our life, to have that kind of a plan. But there are times, of course, when we start noticing that even though I have a plan, certain things aren't going according to my plan. You know who else had a plan, I'm sure? Mary. She had a plan. She was a young child, not young child, but she was young, a young woman. And I'm sure she had plans for her life. But then at a young age, we look back at our church tradition, it tells us that from a young age, she was orphaned. So whatever plans she may have thought she had, they changed very quickly. she was orphaned at a young age. Excuse me. Then she went and lived in the temple. And then at some time, it became difficult for her to stay in the temple, so that's when she was betrothed to an elderly gentleman. And this older gentleman that we know, his name is Joseph, right? Yeah. So now she's betrothed to Joseph. And thinking about all the plans that she's making in her head. She's kneeling to pray one day, and all of a sudden this angel appears to her and says, "Hey, Mary." Well, he didn't say, "Hey, Mary." He says, "Peace to you, Mary." He approaches her, and of course this idea about, that she's perplexed. There's this being, this heavenly being is in front of me. Sorry. And he's telling me these things that I'm going to conceive a child. And not just any child, I'm going to conceive the Lord. It doesn't make any sense to me. Her plans continue to keep changing. Does she start freaking out and run out of the room? No. What does she say? Let it be, as you said, let it be according to your word. Behold, the handmaid of the Lord. Even though these plans are radically changing, she still had that one word. She had that trust. She had that trust. This idea of trusting in the Lord is a very old concept for us. And she kind of actually makes mention of it here in this passage that we read from today. Once this announcement comes to her, she gets up and she goes and visits Elizabeth, which is this portion here. She goes and visits Elizabeth. And as she approaches, of course, the time-honored story here that we know, that as she approaches Elizabeth, when she hears the greeting from Mary, what happens in her womb? The baby leaps. And that right there is kind of interesting too, because that tells you that, not only can small children understand or receive some kind of grace, they know there's something that happens on a spiritual level. They don't even have to be born yet. Does it make sense? This child was still in Elizabeth's womb, and it's able to perceive its Lord, who is right in front of it in the womb of Mary. And if you look at the icon there, which is the second icon, and it has Mary visiting Elizabeth, and you can kind of see the outline of both Christ and John the Baptist in the wombs of Elizabeth and Mary. And if you look kind of carefully, you see John the Baptist is kind of bowing a little bit. And what is Christ doing? I don't know, it's really hard to see, but go over there, take a look when you get a chance. Christ is giving a blessing. Christ is giving the blessing in the womb, and John is receiving the blessing in the womb. We have to trust that even the young children, whether they're born yet or not, or recently born, there's something that's happening on a spiritual level. And a lot of times we don't want to believe it. A lot of times we can't see it, and so we're easy to dismiss it. And yeah, that's why my biggest fear is that, especially when we start pushing children away from the church at a young age because we think they don't understand or they don't know, the fear is that once you start pushing them away from the church, it becomes easier and easier for them to create that distance between them and the church. But even from the moment of conception, a child should be in the church. Not from the moment as they're born, not from the moment they can read, not from the moment when they learn how to say Our Father, not from the moment that they can pay attention to what's even happening up here, not from that moment. But from the moment of conception itself, that child should be in the church. Which means for that child to be in the church, what needs to happen? The mother also has to be in the church as well. Right? And also the father, because don't get me wrong, it takes two. So both of you guys should be in the church. This idea that prayer as a family shouldn't be a strange thing to this child that's developing in the womb. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that happen beneath the surface that we're not aware of. There's a lot of changes that are happening beneath the surface that we're not aware of. Children become aware of things as early as the womb, as we witness even here in the gospel, but even medical science tells you all those things. But on a spiritual level, John was able to recognize his Lord coming to him. And so he leaped in the womb for joy because he gets to be in the presence of his Lord. So we trust in the Lord. This goes back to the idea of trust. We have to trust that God is even taking care of the spiritual needs of these young children who are not even born yet. Then let's consider the ones who have been born, who are young babies or young children, or even the rest of us who are children at heart. Are we creating a distance between us and the church? Are we running away from the church? Are we pushing our kids away from the church? As I tell you, the earlier that starts, the easier it becomes. But if the name of the Lord is familiar to our kids from a young age, even from the womb, as is witnessed by John, that blessing is there, that grace is there, they get filled with grace from a young age, from an age of something that's even inexplicable to us. So don't worry about it if we don't understand it. Trust that God's going to take care of it. Don't worry about it if the kid understands or doesn't understand. The same thing we talk about infant baptism. The kid doesn't know infant baptism, but something's happening there. And we've all been witness to that. The same thing, do you ask your child's consent before you give them an immunization? Do you give informed consent to the child? No. Do you want to show them the double-blind study of the results of the immunization to make sure it's safe for the child? No. You have trust. If we can trust them when it comes to the body, why don't we trust them when it comes to our spiritual needs as well? This idea of trust is not a new thing, as I mentioned before. It goes all the way back to here. Even Mary mentions of it here. She says this very special prayer called the Magnificat. Magnificat is basically this idea of praising the Lord, magnifying the Lord. And it's a praise that she says. It talks about all the promises that God has made. And the irony of it, the idea that the powerful get to fall, the rich, the wealthy, the greedy, they get sent away. He has helped his servants. He's helped those who are weak, the ones who are downtrodden, he helps them. While the mighty ones, he pushes them off their throne. He exalts the lowly. The hungry, he fills with good things, and the rich he sends away empty. And all these promises he has made to whom? Did he make it? Where do these promises originate from? What does she say? As he has spoken to our fathers, to Abraham. This covenant that we believe in goes all the way back to Abraham. That first covenant, that first promise that was made goes all the way back to Abraham. God made a promise to Abraham and said, I'm going to fulfill this promise not just to you, but to all your descendants, to your seed, to all your descendants forever. Both who are of the people of Israel and those who are, like we said later on, the wild shoots that are grafted in. The Gentiles, both the Jews and the Gentiles. They get this promise. God keeps his promises. Scripture reminds us over and over and over, God keeps his promises. God does not change. He's immutable. He does not change. He continues to keep his promise to us. So if it takes two people to make a covenant, right, to make a promise. And in biblical terms, you talk about a covenant, it's much stronger than just a promise. Let's say that we'll use promises, it's easy for us to understand. It takes two people to make that promise. Many times the promise fails. And we know that God never changes. So who's the reason why the promises always fail? Us. We are. If you go back and take a look at the 40-year journey of the Israelites in the wilderness, God continued to show them the way. God continued to show them who he is. And yet, they always found a reason to complain. They always found a reason to lose their trust in him. To rebel against him because of their sinfulness, because of this idea that they all have a plan. And for some reason, when that plan doesn't go according to the way they think it should, they start freaking out a little bit. They start losing that trust. So I urge us, especially as we're praying, we're going week by week, day by day during this feast, the fast of nativity. Think about all these plans that we have in our life and all these plans that we made that could have been. And think that and reflect, looking at that icon, maybe as you walk out the church today after Kindness or something, reflect on that icon as you look at it. That if God can take care of the spiritual needs of those who are still in the womb, think what greatness he can take care of for those who are outside of the womb. Those who are young children as well as those who are older. It's not God who fails the promises, it's us. We're the ones who fail to keep up our side of the promise. All God asks for is one thing, a little faithfulness, a little trust in him. Sometimes we make plans, but our plans don't always match up to his plans. And our plans can sometimes fall through. Our plans can sometimes fail. And that's okay. Because Mary had some plans, I'm sure, in her life. I'm sure Joseph had some plans in his life. But God takes that, our plans, and breaks them sometimes, and makes them fail sometimes, because he has better plans for us. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to make you prosper, to make you grow for your benefit, as the prophet says. So let us trust in God. Learn to trust in God. Whether our plans go awry or not, go back and look at the promises that he's made and the fact that he takes care of even the young ones who are still in the womb to the older ones who are walking around. Let us keep those promises and remaining faithful to him. All praise and thanksgiving to the Blessed Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and always, and forever and ever.